midnight, Saturday night. So I was like, I'm not in a position to read anything about anything. So I'm so glad Sean had everything all taken care of. So Sean led us last week on a discussion of Thomas Kuhn and the structure of scientific revolution and the relationship between science and kind of the stuff that we're talking about, which is structures and paradigms and ways of thinking. Let's see if we can't kind of wrap up what he was talking about, because he did an excellent job of really bringing that forward. Do we remember? I know a lot of us have slept since then. Do we remember what he was talking about in terms of science? Do you remember?
I remember.
Yeah, Sean remembers. That's excellent. Oh, by the way, did you already talk about this, John? The Fall Festival?
I forgot to say.
Okay, we got an outline for Fall Festival sign up. So we'll just start it here, and we'll work our, actually we'll start here, and then we'll work our way that way. All right? So, what were some things that you remember about last week with the idea of science and the paradigms? Do we remember? Do we remember what some of the implications of that was at all?
Kind of thing that facts don't speak for themselves. And
Okay.
You come to the data with a preconceived notion, and it's really easy to, pick the data that fits, or you make a test to verify your hypothesis based on your worldview, and it's easy to throw away the annoying data that.
Yeah, he called it naughty data, I think is what you called it, right? Naughty data. What was the relationship with naughty data and the paradigm? Do you remember?
We built new paradigms to try to incorporate more of this naughty data.
Yes, that we use more of the paradigms. We had a shift in a paradigm when there's too much naughty data and we don't have enough that fits into the paradigm. So we have a shift when we are going, okay, we have to incorporate more understandings into this. One of the biggest things that he hinted at, I really didn't have a chance to say a whole lot on it, but he hinted at science is not just about uncovering the world or understanding the world. Because if you remember, he talked about Newtonian relationships, right? He said, hey, when you're in the 1700s, what do you need to do? Like, what could you do with quantum physics? There's nothing to do with quantum physics. You can't do it. You can't even measure quantum physics. So they didn't have quantum physics because the culture itself had no use for quantum physics. But with Newtonian physics, right? Newtonian physics kind of served the cultural needs. How do we get to blast a cannonball? How do we determine whether a cannonball is going to land? Like, you use Newtonian physics to kind of make all that happen. So one of the things that he was hinting at was that the idea that science serves something. That's kind of at the root of what Kuhn is getting at, is that science is about how humans interact and function in the world. And we're going to build on this kind of today, because we're going to talk about power. I'm kind of leading us up to here, but this is kind of the stuff that is actually impacting our world right now. So if we were to talk about Kuhn's idea, which is that science isn't really about uncovering the truth of the world. Science is about helping us find and interact and use stuff in the world. Well, this becomes a question of power. Is it giving us what we want it to give us? Who determines what we want it to give us? Who tells us what's the right way to use science and what's the wrong way to use science? How do we apply this information? Who's setting all of that up? And this is where we're going to be talking about power. But we need to kind of rewind a little bit, make sure we're all on the same page. We talked about first order questions. That was a couple months ago now. What were first order questions?
What's wrong with my car?
What's wrong with my car?
What am I eating for lunch?
What am I eating for lunch?
What is my schedule?
What is my schedule today? What's a second order question? I'm taking this off. It's already too hot in here. Right? By the way, if you'll notice, it's not us who makes this room hot. It's actually just a hot room. So, fine. What's the second order question?
Why do I prioritize what I do?
Why are my priorities the way they are?
Why is there sin in the world?
Why is there sin in the world? Great. Now, what's a meta question? Remember, there were 3 types of meta questions.
What is existence?
Okay, ontology. What is existence?
Epistemology.
Epistemology.
Axiology.
Right, and then axiology. Study of values, the study of knowledge, the study of reality. We're going to talk a little bit today about, just a little bit today about reality and how do we know what's real and what's not real. So we're kind of jumping into some of these things. Some of these questions we're kind of hinting at. So Michael Poliani and Thomas Kuhn are talking about how science is more than just about looking up stuff. That it's a discussion about how do we use the world outside of us and towards what goals and towards what purposes. So the idea behind this is that there are a series of relationships and that people are in relationships. And we have to bring in, a couple weeks ago we talked about hermeneutics, right? What's the power of language over us? This was a few weeks ago, I think it was 3-4 weeks ago. Remember, we talked about the girl, we had a video of the girl who was talking about language, and that language controls the way we understand the world. Like, without the word to think of it, we can't think of an idea. We have to have a word that helps us get our head wrapped around. Do you remember that? So that was hermeneutics. So that hermeneutics shapes the way that we think of the world. So language is related to power. Now, is power just about language? What else is involved?
Politics.
Politics. Right? A lot of people say that politics is power. What else is involved? Not just language. Well, how about our sex? And I don't mean sex is in the deed, I mean sex is in the person. If we go to a mechanic and the mechanic is female, and the female says, this is what's wrong with your car, and you go to another mechanic and it's a male, and he says, this is what's wrong with your car, culturally, how are we conditioned to respond to each one of them? I'm not saying you can't be a female mechanic, I'm just saying culturally, how do we respond to that?
Depends on what they said.
Depends on what they said, right? Might be your catalytic converter, she says. And he's like, no, it's your transmission. Right?
Wow.
Which one is it? Well, in terms of our culture, we're kind of conditioned to think that men deal more with this kind of work and women deal more with this kind of work. Well, this gets into how power is impacting all of these things. That language shapes the way we view the world. That our biological bodies shape the way other people look at us, and they shape the way we look at other people. That the way we talk about things shapes the way we understand things. And this begins to talk about power. Now, there's a guy I brought in here who I've read this book. It's just a fun book. It's called The History of Madness by Michael Foucault. Sounds like a page-turner, right? This is actually an incredibly influential book in postmodernism. It's kind of one of the guys who kind of broke down these ideas. Remember, in the pre-modern world, they just took the Bible and what the church said. It's just kind of, this is the way the world really works, right? This is how the world really is, this is how it works. Modernism came along and it kind of took Christianity and it put it into a historical context. It said, no, it's just one view among many, and it's biased and it's bigoted and it has its own perspective. We are objective, we are unbiased, we are scientific, right? So because we're unbiased, scientific, and objective, our view of the world is the real view of the world. And the Christian view of the world, and the Hindu view of the world, and the Muslim view of the world, they're all just views, one view among many. Well, Foucault does a study on madness. This is an influential book, and let me walk you through what he does. So Foucault says, well, have people always talked about madness in the same way? Have people always considered people who are insane, the word we use now, we don't use madness, we use the word insane. That's the word that we use, and we actually don't even use the word insane anymore. We have very specific words like schizophrenia, paranoia, right? These are the words that we don't actually use the word madness or insanity anymore. We use different words. Well, if we're going to go with language has power and influences and shapes us, what does this shift mean? What does it tell us about things? And he goes back to the Middle Ages, and he talks about how in the Middle Ages, people didn't look at madness as a sickness or a disease. They didn't look at it as something that was curable or uncurable. They looked at it as somebody who was touched by the divine. That mad people were somehow living in two realms simultaneously. That they were, you've heard this term before, touched. Right? So the idea that this person is mad in the Middle Ages said this person could be a part of society, could be able to function with society, but everybody knew, oh, that's Sean. You know, he's a little touched. Right? So you don't leave your kid with him, right? But what do? Well, he interacts and he's a part of your society. So what happens as we begin to get a technical label of insanity? We label, and this is one of the things that he does, is he moves us out after the post-enlightenment era, how they talked about madness as a disease of the mind. And so because it's a disease, what do we do with them? We seek to cure them. Or quarantine them. And they get removed from society, and normal becomes no longer just a relative term. It becomes a term that everybody is who isn't mad. This is Foucault's idea, and he's going to build on this all the way through the work. And what he says is that the shifting of madness from someone who's touched and living in two worlds to a clinical disease that is curable and solvable. And this is what we do by giving them very specific labels. By specifically labeling them, it's not just them who gets labeled. We create categories in our minds that we place them into. So what is our solution for madness? Why, we have to give them all kinds of drugs, right? Because what do you do with sick people? You drug them, right? Isn't that what we do? That's one of the things that Foucault talks about, is that the word, the shift in understanding madness from a word, an idea that's a person who dwells in two realms, to a clinical, biological, physical problem that they have, shifts not just this word, that it shifts the whole way we conceive of insanity, madness, insane asylums. It shifts the whole discussion so that we're able to conceive now that a person who has a mental problem, even the word mental problem, we shift our discussion of them. It shifts the way we think about them. It alters how we perceive the external world. Who are they and how do they fit into my larger world? And one of the things that he said is normal people wanted to exercise power over mad people. They were not fitting the description of normal. So because who's to say what really is or is not normal? Who's to say what is or is not proper? Normal people are exercising power over mad people, and we're all okay with this. Now his point, do we think his point is only that madness?
It's an awfully big book for that.
It's an awfully big book for that topic.
Yeah.
It is. How would this apply to other ideas? By the way, this also has its roots in what's called deconstructionism. Deconstructionism also has its roots by another guy, Jacques Derrida, is the guy who does deconstructionism. But what he does is Derrida looks at words and how we use words and how our words classify people. And we put people into phylum. What would be another way of... And by the way, you can get this in your Kinskank book on pages, on chapters 9 and 10 if you want to read more about this. Kinskank's chapters 9 and 10 talks a lot more about this. But let's Just look at this word. This is supposed to be marked. What's this word?
Race.
What is race? What is a race?
Someone's ethnicity.
Is it? Is a race someone's ethnicity?
Something you run in.
You're right. Fantastic. That's great.
A group of
What's a race?
people, group of people with a shared ancestry and shared common physical traits.
Okay. And physical traits? What physical traits?
Color.
Color. Anything else? Culture. So if they have the same physical traits, they have the same culture.
Ethnicity, I think ethnicity is more about where you're from, more of the cultural things. Race is more of the physical.
Race has to do with more of the physical. It's more of a physical thing. Where do we get the idea that there is an African race and a European race? Where do we get this idea from?
It's mostly based off of the physical.
Mostly based off of physical, the physical looking at the, I look at you and you look like you're European.
Well, and to a certain degree, location, I mean, you know.
Okay.
We're Africa, so, you know,
Sure.
the African race, they were born in Africa. And
Right.
raised in Africa. Our ancestry was in Africa.
Right. It has to do with the physicality of it. It don't make sense. By the way, race is an idea that actually didn't exist, say, about 500 years ago. There wasn't a concept of race 500 years ago. You didn't group people according to physical, specifically skin color traits. What you grouped people by was ethnicity. Because they knew, say, for example, an Albanian. An Albanian and us are almost the same. Actually, I'll give you a better illustration. When I was in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 2004, there were two groups of people, the Serbs and the Bosniaks. This is a much better illustration. The Serbs had been Serbs, like that's a culture that goes back for a long, long time. They're ethnically, they look not very distinct from us. They are very similar in terms of externals. There are some genetic traits you can map, but generally speaking, they look like us. Serbs got occupied by the Turks in the 1370s. So they lost their kingdom from the 1300s all the way up into the 20th century. So roughly 700 years. They were occupied by the Turkish Empire, the Turks. The Turks kind of enticed the Serbs to convert to Islam through giving people who were Muslim better trade deals, better market deals, more access to stuff. And it makes sense because they're Muslim and the Serbs were Eastern Orthodox. So the Eastern Orthodox Serbs retained their identity by retaining their Eastern Orthodoxy. To be a Serb is to be Eastern Orthodox. So what do you do with the Serbs who converted?
Call them Bosnians.
They became Bosniaks. And what they were is they were Serb. They looked the same, they spoke the same language, they had almost the same genetic, they were almost identical genetically. But one guy's name was Slobodan, and the other guy's name was Mohammed. Literally, I had two translators when I was in Bosnia, and you couldn't tell the distinction between them. They spoke similar language, but they had different names. That's the only way you know a Bosniak from a Serb. One had a Serbian name, the other one had a Bosniak name. Now, how does race fit into this? How do we classify those two people in race? Because they're both going to fit into the race of Caucasians. So we have exhausted the difference between Bosniaks and Serbs by saying they're the same race, they are Caucasians.
If they did Ancestry.com, it'd be the same, but...
They would be the same.
But their cultural heritage is...
Ethnicity would be completely different. But yet in America, what is this term to us? This is a powerful term. This is a powerful way of relating to people. You're a black person, you go in this category. You're a Caucasian person, you fit in this category. This term is not much different than the idea, it's a made-up term. It comes out of the Enlightenment and it looks at physical differences between people groups. And what it kind of tried to do is it tried to explain why Europe pretty much dominated the world. It's one way of trying to figure out, okay, why did they do this? Well, these people have these physical traits, they seem to dominate. These people have these physical traits, they seem to be in subjugation, so this must be the way it is. Blacks are meant to serve, whites are meant to, I mean, you see how this can kind of get there.
And
That's
then,
kind of,
and then you go to the New World and find a whole new race of people like, oh, looks like there's this whole category, and you even still talk about some people today, you know, they'll talk about IQ or whatever, and there's a spectrum, you know, from the highest to the lowest,
Yes.
you know, based on ancestry.
Mhm.
And even Aristotle, you know, he didn't talk about
Oh, yeah.
race, but, you know, the whole idea that some people were born for greatness
Yes.
and some people were born for...
And he would talk about within Greeks, there were some Greeks who were born to be slaves. They didn't have the disposition of free people. They just needed, well, they needed somebody to tell them what to do. Hey, you need to move this there. Come on, have we all not known someone who just needed to be told what to do all the time? We've ran across those people, right? They're at work and you're like, what are you doing? They're like, I don't know what to do next. Like, sweep the floor. Do you not see the stuff on the floor? Come on, right? That disposition, that's what Aristotle was talking about. This applies to race. Now, race is a language of what? This concept, this idea, deals with what? It's about power. The idea of breaking people down to race is one way of saying this is why one race is superior, this is why another race is superior. So the whole category of race, this is where Foucault kind of goes. It's not just about madness. It's about how we use words to classify people and to control people. That's Foucault's point. It's a big fat book to say it's about how we use words and language to classify and control people. And what does this mean that words are really about? Words are really about power. Power and control. What do we think of this? What do we think of this idea? Let's bounce this idea around a little bit. I can do one. Can we do one more to help understand it? Let's do one more to help understand it a little better, and this will make it a lot more interesting for us. All right? Let's go with this one. What's this word? What's this word mean? How do we use it in our culture?
Can't be explained by 8th grade science class.
Is that how people say it? That's one way of getting at it.
Non-repeatable.
Non-repeatable.
Defies the laws of nature.
Defies the laws. This is a much better way of getting at it. Defies the laws of nature. Now, in our culture, what is the natural world? The natural world is the things that we see every day, day in and day out. These are the things that have to do with regular occurring events that we can predict with some measure of accuracy. Hey, the sun's going to rise tomorrow. Nobody looks at the sun rising as a supernatural event. Why? Happens every day, and we think of it as natural. What this word does is it creates two types of boxes. One is the natural box, and the other one is the supernatural box. It's a category. It's a way of thinking about the world, a way of placing things into relationships, right? So we look at the sun rising, not as a supernatural event. Is God involved in it? Well, no, because by definition, where's God? What box does God go into? Supernatural, right? So is God involved in the sun rising? No, it's not supernatural. It is natural. So the sun becomes absolutely nothing to do with God and has everything to do with the natural world. Okay? What do we do with things like I had cancer and now I don't? I had cancer, and now I don't. It depends on why. Let's give you some why. I had cancer. I went to a doctor. He injected me with radioactive material, which he said was going to nuke all the cancer cells in my body. And now I don't have cancer anymore. Which box does it fit into? Which, this is natural, right? So I had cancer. Now it's no longer there. So God had nothing to do with what? With my loss of cancer. God wasn't involved. Why? Because God fits in the supernatural category, right? This is a natural event. This word, supernatural, the word supernatural causes us to divide reality into two realms. one of which is easily explainable by natural event. The other ones we go, well, I don't know what that is. And what happens to God being a supernatural entity? He gets further and further and further removed from anything that happens in our lives. Does anyone see, do you see what I'm talking about here, I hope? This word itself, the word supernatural, bifurcates, splits reality into two types of things, supernatural or natural. And then we wonder why people run around saying, well, there's only really one reality, which is natural. And you have to prove the supernatural to me. The word itself causes a type of atheism. And if you understand what the word means, the more you understand what the word means, the more you become atheistic. Just by the use of the word itself. And that is what Michael Foucault would say is power. It is controlling the way you think about the world. What do you think of this?
It's interesting from that standpoint that anytime you can, as an atheist mind, you can connect the dots. If you can have any connection of the dots, then God had no part of it.
Right.
And it can be, even if it's tenuous.
Oh yeah. Oh, you've been eating healthy? You've been eating healthy for the last 15 years. Well, maybe your body overcame it, so we no longer have a supernatural explanation. We now have a natural explanation. You didn't lose cancer supernaturally. You lost it naturally. Other thoughts on this? What do we think of his idea here?
I think it's a useful tool, but as you don't want to drive the car too far when the wheels fall off. I mean, so A...
Okay, you're gonna have to flesh that out a little bit.
I mean, power is not the only metric for measuring human interaction with each other and with the world. So while it is a useful tool, it's dangerous and oversimplistic to merely reduce everything to power relationships. And B, for the word doesn't have the power, it's us ascribing meaning or accepting the word. You know, if we were to present the word supernatural to Thomas Aquinas, he wouldn't all of a sudden, poof, become a naturalist and then have to really go into self-reflection to fight away. Like, we have to buy the word.
But the idea, the word itself, you have to explain to a person what the word means. If you were to go to an African, even today, in some parts of Africa, and you use the word supernatural, you're like, what are you talking about? Mm-hmm. And the moment you're giving them a definition of what the word means, they now have a conception of, it's possible to have a world where God isn't involved, or the spirits aren't involved. You're right, it doesn't happen automatically, but the more you use the word, and the more you imbibe it, and the more you bring it into your daily conversations, and the more it becomes a way of talking about the world, the more what? The more power it has over you. Yeah?
This has been used for years in daily life. Politics does it all the time. You search for words that really work and have power over another group, and because of that word, it becomes, well, you don't care.
Absolutely.
I mean, the whole pro-choice, some of the terms that have been used over time, it's a battle of words, and who has control over those words makes a big difference.
Yeah, and this is where it's hard to just go, he's just a postmodern kook, and just chuck. It's hard to just chuck the whole thing out. The question is, all right, so what is this relationship? How does it work? He seems to have got onto something. He's onto something. But you can see how power now becomes the dominant conversation. Power becomes the dominant conversation. Now this idea has not just stayed there, guys. You can see this in our culture nowadays. You think it's an accident that certain political parties have been called Nazis for the last 30 years. That's not an accident. It's not an accident. When you use the term Nazi and you throw it on somebody, it is like gasoline on a fire. I'm trying to label you. I'm trying to have power over you. And you either accept that label or you don't accept that label. I think what we've gotten to go now is, now we're a little more sophisticated. I think we kind of recognize, hey, you're throwing gasoline on something.
I think, I mean, in the other direction too, the word socialist.
Oh, absolutely.
Lots of well-meaning
Yes, yes.
conservative free marketeers have called, Bill Clinton a socialist.
Or, right, and he wasn't.
And then all of a sudden, real socialists come along, they're like, it's a socialist, it's a socialist.
It's a real socialist.
And everyone goes, snooze, okay. And there's also the, words have power, there's also the boy that cried wolf
Yes,
type thing. It's
yes.
like, you call every Democrat a socialist since FDR, and then, you run out of words. Or, the same way, you call every
Yes.
Republican a racist, and then, an actual racist comes like, oh, you have to say white supremacist, or you have to
Right,
say
you have to update it, 'cause-
Confederate, and you start running out of words.
Yeah. So here's where this begins to go. Postmoderns take this idea of power and they bifurcate it into the oppressor and the oppressed. You can see this all through our culture right now. It is all over the place. The race, it is a race to be the first person oppressed. Now, I'm not exactly sure why this is the case. Because in terms of philosophically speaking, the oppressed and the oppressor ought to be philosophically the same. There's just one group who has power and the other group who does not. It should just be that, but that's not the way it is in our culture. The oppressed have all the trump cards. If you can come forward and you can show why you are oppressed, everything that you say is therefore validated. When this comes down, this has its roots in Foucault, and it's got its roots in this very powerful idea that words have power. All of society gets broken down to, and all of history, honestly, is the oppressor and the oppressed. And so you understand all relationships are relationships of oppressor and oppressed. What do we do with this? And this is, hopefully you're able to see this. Like, this is all over the place. Who can see this kind of in our political culture or social culture? It is all over the place. Is this idea of the oppressor and the oppressed. Technically, there shouldn't be a moral value between the two. Technically, it ought to just be, well, this person has power and this one doesn't. But that's not how it actually works out. I can't figure out how they make the jump that we should be on this person's side. I don't know why. I have been kicking myself and going all over the place. The only thing that makes sense to me is a residual Christian idea that you should take care of the weak. That's the only thing that makes sense for me. That the strong oughtn't to oppress the weak. That's the only thing that makes sense. A residual Christian idea that the strong should take care of the weak, not oppress them. Other than that, I can't see why you would side with the oppressed over the oppressor. If you're going to split society into the oppressed and the oppressor.
So you're saying that if you can label yourself as oppressed, that gives you power?
In our culture, isn't that what we raised to?
Yeah.
It's the first person who can claim a grievance. I have been wronged. The first person who can say that, the victim versus the criminal. That's kind of the way it works. Well, it stems from this concept of power. All relationships are rooted in power. All of them. This is kind of a postmodern thing. All relationships are rooted in power. Power dynamics. Power between men and power between women. This is why you have men here, women here, and then there ends up creating a type of hierarchy, if you can believe it. There's a hierarchy of who gets to be the most oppressed. You can kind of see it out there. I mean, that's kind of the way it works.
That's where we get to this term intersectionality. That's where that all happens.
It's out there. Like this, if I was making this stuff up, you wouldn't all be nodding your head and going, oh man, yeah. Well, this is where it comes from. It comes from Foucault and Derrida, which deconstructs all language and all relationships down to power. That there's someone who's in control, and this is how they deconstruct science, by the way, as well. Science, Kuhn's idea falls into this. Because science ends up being a people who have power and who are squeezing out those who are dissident voices, and they squeeze them out to the margins. Intelligent design is an example. They squeeze those voices out to the margin. They don't want to have anything to do with it. I'm not saying you should be an intelligent designer. I'm just saying it demonstrates how they use positions of power and influence. Who does the government throw money out to? Who do they give grants to? Well, that matters. Who they give grants to matters. If you are being given money year after year after year to research greenhouse gases, I'm not saying global warming doesn't happen. I'm simply saying if you've been given money year after year after year to find global warming, are you motivated to find global warming? Or are you demotivated to find global warming? You have a motivation. Now, I'm not saying that didn't happen. I'm just simply saying that's kind of what they're driving at. And there seems to be something here. How much of the something? How much of what is this? How do we use this? How do we understand this? What do we do with this? You guys throw it back to me now. Hopefully you find this stuff interesting. I find this stuff fascinating. By the way, this is how philosophy intersects with real life. Like, these ideas, they matter because they get played out in relationships around you. What do we as Christians do with this? How do we interact with this? Do we go where Clayton says, man, we're driving it till the wheels fall off? What do we do?
Well, I think for one thing, we need to be aware of the power that words
Yeah.
have. And
Sure.
part of that whole taking every thought captive, I think, plays into this.
Yeah, that's
So,
supernatural, dude. That's some seriously powerful stuff.
You know, and I think that we need to be very careful, especially when we hear a new word being played out in the media or out, you know, just kind of be aware, wait a minute, what does that mean? What are they applying that to? What impact is this having? You know, I mean, I think we probably each have our own little specific wedge of the pie as far as what our area of
Sure.
specialty is, but I know for me, different things that like in the LGBTQ community, things that they're putting out there, even just new naming for reassignment surgeries,
Yep.
that now they're called realignment surgeries. You know, it's not a gender modification surgery, it's a realignment.
Realignment. Aligning with what? With what?
Yeah, you know,
yeah.
and so just being aware of that.
Well, now you're hearing even cisgender, isn't that what?
Uh-huh.
You're hearing cisgender to
Yes.
describe people that go by their sex and
Sure.
stick with their biological self.
Yeah, yeah.
Who thinks we should completely reject this idea that Foucault puts out? It's completely nonsensical, it doesn't work. Okay? Who thinks that we've got to figure out how to incorporate him without buying him wholesale? Fair enough.
I think, you know, if we just took this last example here, we're prospecting, and we took that wholesale, then as Christians, we should just be crying foul all the time.
Yes.
The extreme with the hindrance that's,
Oh, yeah.
you know, hostile.
Yes.
But that's not who we are as Christians either.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're to do everything in love. And so there's yeah, so there's you know, we see racism is a real thing.
Yes.
People, you know, we know, you know, that sexism is a real thing. You know, and the gender pay, you know, gender is a real thing. And we've seen responses that are appropriate, and we've seen just hate-filled, you know, racism. You know, and what that causes, the difference between the black and white community is one thing. The difference between the perceived neo-Nazis and Jewish community is is quite another, you know, in their response and how they're, and because of how they respond to a perception of that. I'm not saying that that's even
Sure,
a real issue. I'm just saying that it's a perceived issue.
sure.
We can't, as Christians, allow ourselves to respond that way, even though, you know, there is issues. It's not, you know, it's beyond perceived issues there. So, yeah, I think that we have to be aware of that and raise our voice, but look at how we're going to do that in constructive ways and keeping
Sure.
our Christian truths and responses that will be Christ-like.
Sure.
To kind of go off of what Dr. Swan's saying, I mean, we have these vocal minorities that are speaking out and saying how oppressed they are. I mean, you could argue that there's persecution against the church happening in our country, but we also have this understanding when we commit our lives to Christ, the Bible says we're going to be persecuted.
Right.
So for us to raise our voices against it, I mean, it is finding that balance. Like, we know as Christians we are going to be persecuted, and so to complain about every little thing wouldn't be right as Christians. But where is that line?
But where is this line? How do we interact with this? I had a conversation with a pastor in our community not too long ago. It happened to be African American, and it was this whole victim, oppressor, oppressed language, the whole thing, all the way through. And in the conversation, I was agreeing a lot with what he's talking about in terms of past, and in terms of language, and how all this whole 9 yards. Now, the statement was that this pastor was saying that whiteness was evil. Whiteness was of the devil, and I was trying to say, what are you meaning by that? So I pulled out what he meant by that, and he didn't mean whiteness is in white people. What he meant was whiteness is in the concept of race applied to another race as being inferior. Well, I don't know that that's whiteness, but that's what he was using, the term whiteness. And I said, I think you might be better served if you used a different term. It put us at odds. Even that kind of soft correction ended up putting us at odds so that we can't hardly even have a conversation with him. Oh, and I was agreeing with him on almost everything that he had said, and I said, I think that this word, another word would better serve you in a ministry. And that put us at odds. So the ability to even gently correct in a small way became incapable. Because I was listening to it, I'm hearing, I didn't agree with everything he was saying, but I was listening. I'm listening, I'm hearing. Any kind of disagreement was wholesale disagreement. You either buy the whole package or you buy none of it. And the idea of any kind of moderated discourse, gone. And this was with a pastor of our own denomination. So it makes this very, very difficult. How do we have these conversations? How does power relate to this? How do you have any kind of, when you're the oppressor, which is I was in that category talking with him, when I'm the oppressor, no disagreement is possible. None. It is either a wholesale agreement on every line or it's total disagreement. That makes it extremely difficult to have coherent conversations. Yeah?
Could argue another conversation about that is with feminism and that whole discussion. That's another example of that wholesale sort of
Male privilege.
oppressed.
Yes, and any disagreement is total disagreement. And there's no ability to have any kind of moderate, because these things have played themselves out. Yeah.
I think, that's a good point of why we should be careful of it, and why, even though there's truth that our senses should be up, like this isn't the gospel wholesale, because that idea destroys community.
Yes, it does.
You cannot have any kind of peer, you cannot have kinship,
Nope.
even within a marriage.
Yes.
You say, there's an oppressor and oppressed
Yes.
person, it's usually the male. It's like, what was supposed to be this symbiotic, loving,
Yes.
self-giving relationship has become, and every, you're the Sunday school teacher, I'm the student. You're
I'm the
oppressing.
oppressor, you're the
And
oppressed.
there's no sense of community, there's no sense of, like you
Yes.
said, moderate correction, and that's not what Christ and the 12 apostles.
Yeah, well, and it sets up an us and them thing, which time and time again, we as Christians, through the power of the Holy Spirit, we need to be seeking love and breaking down those barriers and remembering that in Christ, he said, there is now no longer male or female, slave or free, Jew or Gentile. And all of those were words that talk about power.
Yes.
Those words were
Power
words
words.
that were power words. And, you know, so in Christ, there is the power over the power words.
Yes.
And, you know, and so if anything can help us to go beyond those words, it's the love of Christ. And love is going to be the thing that is going to be able to break
Yeah,
down those barriers.
it does create this problem. Love becomes impossible with this. But this is the controlling hermeneutic. Power is the controlling way that you understand everything. Love becomes really impossible. Love is just a word you use to manipulate another person. And so there are some interesting things here. I don't know if we take it wholesale. But this is part of why our culture is so crazy, by the way, guys. This is partly why it's doing what it's doing. Is because this conception, this idea, we're interpreting it. Have you ever heard anyone say, politics isn't everything? They're interpreting all relationships through the lens of power. Power is the hermeneutic that you interpret every relationship by. If you do that, you end up outside any kind of real community.
Yes.
Because if you're an African-American male, technically you're the oppressor of the African-American female. And if you have a little bit more money than the other African-American male, then you're in some way, shape, or form oppressing him. So it ends up very estranged from community, yeah.
You see this at work in not just politics, I mean, politics is so bad now because jobs depend on it. Absolutely depend on this division. You see that in the commercials, etc. They have to create this difference to get elected.
Yes.
But now even in our news channels, so much where this is an entertainment, it's not news anymore, it's an entertainment and feed what I believe.
Yes.
The comedy shows, everything is created for division.
Yes. It divides. It does not bring community. Which is surprising then. Is it really all that surprising that we no longer have communities? We have nothing in common. Can't find anything in common because all relationships boil down to power. And if all relationships are power, then one of us is, my wife or me, one of us are always trying to strong-arm the other. It gets impossible to live in any kind of community with this. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this. Hopefully it's enlightening, at least should show some things about our culture, how we got here, I'm not sure what the solution is. I think you just have to critically engage them kind of as they go, but expect resistance. Any kind of critique at all of this system is a wholesale rejection. So it's difficult right now to have any kind of coherent conversations because of this. Because of this. Father, we're thankful for this day. We're thankful that you are the one who has all power. You are the one who understands everything perfectly. We are those who are simply trying to follow. We follow imperfectly. We follow without a keen sense of knowledge of right and wrong, but Lord, you know it. Help us to be your people who follow your path. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.